8 o'clock on GB News. I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. A very warm welcome to you this Jubilee bank holiday weekend to a very special edition of The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. This morning, something a little bit different. An exclusive tour of Elizabeth Tower, the clock tower of Parliament, which of course famously houses Big Ben. I was lucky enough to have an exclusive tour by two of the finest historians and indeed clockmakers in Parliament last week, and we're going to show you that very special tour after your morning headlines.
A very good morning to you. It is 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Queen has thanked all of those involved in her Platinum Jubilee celebrations over the four-day bank holiday weekend. In a special message, Elizabeth II says she continues to be inspired by the goodwill shown to her. Millions of people are participating in patriotic street parties across the nation to mark the Queen's record-breaking 70-year reign. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex will join the royal family at Trooping the Colour at 10 o'clock, where the Prince of Wales will be inspecting the guardsmen and officers in place of the Queen. Over 1,000 people have been recognised in the Queen's Jubilee Honours list. They include NHS Director Professor Stephen Powis, who'll be made a Knight, and Chief Nursing Officer Ruth May, who'll be made a Dame. Actor Damien Lewis has been made a CBE, and the Scottish crime writer Ian Rankin has been knighted. The former Northern Ireland First Minister and GB News presenter Arlene Foster has also been made a Dame.
Well, of course, it's a personal honour and I'm really delighted with it, but I hope it will be reflected back on the people of Fermanagh and South Tyrone who give me such support when I was their member. And indeed, as I say, as the first female First Minister, it's wonderful to have this acknowledgement.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Amber Heard says she's disappointed after losing her defamation lawsuit against ex-husband and actor Johnny Depp. The jury unanimously found that she acted with malice in a 2018 article in which she claimed she was the victim of sexual violence. Johnny Depp was in a pub in Newcastle when it emerged he'd been awarded £12 million in damages. The Ukrainian men's football team have moved a step closer to the World Cup in Qatar later this year with a victory over Scotland. Well, Ukraine's 3-1 win last night at Hampden means the side will now take on Wales on Saturday. The match in Glasgow had originally been postponed because, of course, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You are up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now let's head to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, 70 years on the throne, a platinum jubilee for our Queen. It's not just a platinum jubilee that celebrates the longest reigning monarch in British history, but there are some pretty enormous world milestones too. In just 10 days, Elizabeth II will become the second longest reigning monarch in world history, overtaking Rama IX of Thailand. And now it's less than 2 years until Queen Elizabeth II overtakes Louis XIV of France to become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the world. What an enormous honour. Well, it's not just the celebrations at Buckingham Palace that we have been exploring today on GB News. Last week, I was able to have an exclusive tour of Elizabeth Tower, the clock tower of Parliament, named in honour of Queen Elizabeth II back in 2012 for her last Jubilee. More popularly known, perhaps, as Big Ben. It, of course, houses that famous clock, that famous bell. Well, I was given an exclusive tour of it last week, and I'm delighted that I can show you that now. Over the last 5 years, the clock tower has been renewed, restored, and we'll be being able to see today exactly what's gone on, the masonry, the history, and everything else. It's up these stairs, and I'm excited to show you.
I'm Ian Westworth, and my duty here is to look after the Great Clock of Westminster and about 2,000 other clocks on the estate.
How close is this now to how it will have been when it was first set up?
It's very close. We've taken it right back to every nut and bolt we've had a look at. Through time, there's been a couple of modifications to it, but if Dent came back here, the man who designed the clock, if he came back here, he would certainly recognise what he designed, and we'd keep it running for him.
And what are these words that are cast into the face of the mechanism here? What do they say?
It actually says that the clock was designed by Sir Edmund Beckett Denison in 1854. They actually built it, but it wasn't actually brought into the palace for a long time because the tower wasn't ready for it, because there was building work going on. We'll gild all the letters across the front so it stands out.
What has been the most difficult aspect of restoring this huge clockwork? I imagine that there must have been wear and tear over time.
Yeah, the 160 years that it's actually been running, it's been remarkably good. It was built fantastically. It's over-engineered, most Victorian stuff is. The biggest problem we had is just the sheer logistics. The clock itself, just the bits, we took away nearly 11 tonnes of metalwork when we stripped the whole clock out. And we're up in the top of a tower, so everything had to go down the tower, get moved to Cumbria, where we did all the restoration work, then bring it all back, and then bring it back up the tower to reassemble it where it is sitting now.
It just had a big clunk as you were speaking there. What was that? Was that a minute going by?
No. So what it's done, it's moved a series of levers, and if all the weights were connected, you would have heard even a bigger clunk, and it would have got ready to strike and chime 1/4 hour.
And there's no electricity at all in this mechanism. It's all powered by weights in exactly the way it was when it was designed.
Yes. Once we finished all the trials that we're doing at the moment, all the testing, the only electricity we use is to help us wind the weights back up. Because at the moment we've got a 1.25 tons underneath the chiming train, we have a ton of weight underneath the strike train, and just 1/4 ton under the going train. So we wind them up every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and that gives us enough power to last till the following wind-up, really.
And they slowly tick down, and I suppose that also turns those enormous minute and hour hands on those 4 clock faces. Yet not all of those 4 clock faces, as we speak, are all moving at the same rate. Some of them are frozen in time. Why is that?
What the west dial at the moment is stopped because there's some work going on just behind where the clock dial is. So to stop dust and debris getting into the dial itself, which is exactly why we stopped it in the first place, to stop all the dust. Once you get dust into a clock, it just wears it away really fast. So now we've got some more dust in there. We've stopped that dial to stop it wearing, but the other 3 dials have been driven by the clock that's behind you now.
And when can we expect this all to be ready to reopen?
Ready to open later this year, and when we'll have it all back in its former glory.
And does that mean that in order to avoid the dust getting back into the mechanism, it needs to be sealed off? Will this be a part of the whole mechanism that not many people will be able to see?
No, that once all the building work's finished, the clock then turns back into quite a clean environment. The only dust will be people bringing their dust in off the street, which is very minimum. It's brick dust and metal dust, grinding metal, that's the big problem for us. Once everybody's gone, we'll clean the clock through again, just to make sure that we've got rid of everything, and then it'll keep ticking. And what we'll do in the future, we just keep on servicing it and inspecting it for the rest of its life, just making sure it keeps going.
It must have been an incredibly rewarding project. This is probably the most famous clock in the world. What's been your biggest highlight over the last 5 years of restoration?
Biggest highlight was... Well, there's the highlights and lowlights. The low light was when we stopped the clock and we silenced the bells. That's a big shock because my job up till then had been keeping them running. But the big highlight will be when the bells come back on and we start striking and chiming the hour. People on the street outside will be looking up again and saying, oh, you know, there's Big Ben, doesn't it look beautiful after the restoration? And it's just once everybody's gone from in here, just being able to sit in here and listen to the tick of the clock. That'll be well worth the 5 years of work.
Hello, I'm Mark Collins. I'm the estates historian at the Palace of Westminster.
This tower, this clock tower, has started to lean.
Yes, it was probably leaning quite early on in its history, but now it's about 200 millimetres out at the very top. It leans over to the northwest, but it's not going to move any farther because they, when they built the Jubilee line, which runs adjacent to the tower, they pumped a great deal of concrete as cement underneath the tower, so it's very stable now.
Was there a risk that this tower could have become sort of a new Leaning Tower of Pisa? Was there a risk that without that work being done, this could become really quite dangerous?
Well, the Leaning Tower of Pisa actually was in a much more dangerous state, actually. But the same engineer, Professor Burland, was in charge of work on the Tower at Pisa and managed to stabilise that, and worked here at Big Ben as well in the 1990s. So he knew exactly how to carry out the work.
So this is incredibly exciting. We're behind the actual clock face of the tower. Can you speak to how this has been restored?
The dials, which are 23 feet across, they're about 7 metres wide, are made of cast iron segments which have been bolted together, and they have 324 panes of mouth-blown, hand-cut glass in them, this pot opal glass, which gives a white, milky effect with the lights behind them. We did some research for the colours on the exterior, so it's always been black since the 1930s.
And has that been soot? Has that just been because London was so smoggy?
It's probably a very good point that, in fact, they painted them black because they had gone so dirty in the London atmosphere at that time. This is before the Clean Air Act. And so we looked at old watercolours and drawings from the specifications and found that, in fact, it was blue that they'd used. And when we did paint sampling as well on the exterior, we discovered that, in fact, that was the case. And it's this royal blue, it's Prussian blue, in fact, and very vivid, very rich colour.
But it's not just the face of the clock, because also all of the paraphernalia around the outside, the flowers of the different nations of the United Kingdom, and also the sort of shields below those flowers, which have been completely transformed in their colour.
And so you've got the thistle, you've got the shamrock, the leek, and the rose for England. They've been given new, fresher colours, which were quite bright. We think of the Victorians as being a bit dark, a bit gloomy, but there are also some shields which show the Red Cross of St George. They'd been painted black in the 1930s as well, but we've brought back the red of St George. The floral emblems are at a higher level, so all parts of the United Kingdom are actually represented on the outside of the tower.
And of course, we're standing in front of some big bulbous protuberances from the wall. And these are to light up the clock face.
Yes, that's right. Originally, they were gas-lit, all the dials, in the first instance, but then gradually electricity was brought in. Now we've made them much more environmentally friendly. So the whole tower has been given a green makeover.
And these are LEDs now,
yes,
which
LED
don't use much electricity at all, but also I hear they can do something quite special. They can change colour if we so choose.
Yes, that's right. If there's a desire now, so many buildings around the world have different colours either projected on them or from the inside, we can do that as well.
So we're up in the belfry, and could you just explain a little bit about the history of these different sized bells and actually the famous Big Ben itself?
Big Ben is the second iteration of the bell, because in 1856 they cast the first one, but it was tested too much with too large a hammer in New Palace Yard, and it broke. So they had to melt it down and create the second Big Ben. It weighs 13.7 tons, and it strikes after the 4 quarter bells have chimed the tune, which is so familiar, the Westminster chimes. They were taken from Great St Mary's Church in Cambridge, which the man who specified the bells, Edmund Beckett Denison, knew because he was an undergraduate at Cambridge.
And ever since the 1850s, this particular bell, Big Ben, has been sitting here in this tower.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it had to be taken up on its side through a shaft inside the tower in a wooden cradle. It had to be winched up over a couple of days. And then it was put in place and tested over the next month or two. But it too cracked. So they reduced the size of the hammer, turned the bell a little, and after a year or two it was working properly as we hear it today.
And of course, for the last 5 years, we haven't been hearing those regular bells. We've only heard them on certain special occasions. How difficult has it been to get the bell to ring while all this work has been going on?
It was very important to silence Big Ben and all the bells as people were working on it for health and safety reasons. So yes, for 5 years we haven't heard it, and it's only now that we're able to put it back together with the clock, and we're undertaking the tests at the moment. But it has been used on Remembrance Sunday and New Year's Eve with a temporary mechanism. So it is possible to do that, and we'll keep that temporary mechanism for occasions when we might be repairing the clock in the future.
Back in January 2020, there was a big political kerfuffle over whether or not this particular bell would ring on the 31st of January on Brexit Day. And indeed, the Prime Minister came up with a phrase, "Bung a bob for a Big Ben bong." Was it particularly difficult, intricate, or indeed expensive to deliver that temporary mechanism?
It wasn't particularly difficult, but it was something we couldn't unfortunately carry out for the Brexit Day because we were still working on the tower. It has been delayed by COVID, so we couldn't spare any time at all, I'm afraid. The materials for the tower have come from the United Kingdom, so the stone originally came from Anston, which is between Sheffield and Worksop in South Yorkshire, and we've been able to source some stone Cadeby from near Doncaster, which is of the same variety. The stairs and the landing on which we're standing is made from Hopton wood stone, a very hard limestone, which comes from Matlock in Derbyshire. And so from all over the country you've had these materials brought, and from all over the country people have come to help repair it.
This sounds like it's the most enormous cost. How much cash has been poured into this project to preserve this tower?
Well, the last business case gave a figure of £79 million altogether, rather higher than we'd expected because of COVID. So the delays for that reason have added about £9 million, unfortunately, to the cost. But of course it's worth it. I mean, it is the supreme totemic symbol of London, of Parliament, and of the United Kingdom.
And at what point will the general public be able to book tours of this place? Will people be able to visit anytime soon?
So by the winter, we'll be inviting all UK residents are welcome to come here by applying through their MP.
The tallest clock tower in the world of its time.
That's right. And after the Victoria Tower at the other end of the building, which is the Queen's State entrance as she arrives for state opening, this was the second tallest square stone tower in the world.
Why have we had this sort of cocoon of scaffolding for so long? And what is being saved as well as renewed over the course of the last 5 years?
So the tower has been repaired 3 times during the 20th century using scaffolding. In fact, originally the tower didn't have any scaffolding around it at all. It was built from the inside, hauling up all the materials from the inside and using a special gantry which was jacked up as the tower rose. But this time, we're giving it the largest repair and conservation programme it's ever had.
So we've come up to the tallest point of Elizabeth Tower, and I have to say the views are absolutely spectacular. All around you can see the rest of the Palace of Westminster. We can swing round to the north and see actually Buckingham Palace in all of its splendour in that sea of green, and all the rest of Whitehall as well. It's really quite the most miraculous view up here. And curiously also an electric light. Can you tell us a bit about the history of that?
Yes, this was the installation which came just a little bit later than the construction of the tower itself, and it's called the Ayrton light, and it's a signal light which is switched on when Parliament is sitting after dark, so that MPs know, and members of the House of Lords, they know when the House is sitting. And it's been here since the 1880s. First of all, they tried out experiments for electric light in the 1870s from up here, and they thought that they would be able to light all the streets around the clock tower at that point.
It must have been the most amazing time of discovery, of learning what electricity could do.
Yes, that's right. These were very early days indeed, and they went on to trial electric light very soon after this on the embankment, but they found that they couldn't generate enough, so they went back to gas. But within the next decade, in the 1880s, they were starting to light other parts of the Palace of Westminster with electric light. So the House of Lords began it. In fact, they were the pioneers, and it went through until just before the First World War. They'd pretty well lit the whole place with electricity by that stage.
It's so interesting that the House of Lords was the first bit to have electric lighting, because so often we associate the Lords with the stuffy old bit, but also they were the first chamber to be televised ahead of the Commons as well. What is it about the Lords that makes them so futuristic?
I'm not sure. I think they feel themselves the more pioneering side, in fact. So they trial out these things first of all.
And of course the BBC installed microphones in the belfry to transmit that sound. My favourite fact about this is because the microphones are up here at the top of the clock, if you're listening to a radio broadcast down at the bottom, you're going to hear it on the radio, you're going to hear the bells on the radio before you actually hear the bells from the tower, because the speed of radio waves is faster than the speed of sound. When were all those microphones and the technological aspects of this installed?
The first time they installed the microphones was in December the 31st, 1923. So they were picking up the sound from microphones a little bit outside the tower on a building below, and then relaying that back to the Savoy Hill, so the BBC's earlier headquarters. And so a little bit later, a few years after that, they put the microphones inside the belfry.
Would this have been a grand day out to look across the views of London?
Yes, in the late Victorian period, we know by that stage that people were coming up to watch the winding of the great clock. So this became a feature of Saturday afternoons. People nicknamed the whole tower Big Ben. So that comes from the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, you have even more importance reflected on the tower when the chimes and the bells, mainly the sound of Big Ben, is used in the Remembrance Day service on Whitehall. So at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, you hear Big Ben strike, and then in the distance you hear the report of a gun, and that is the symbol that the war, the First World War, had ended. And then it was hit, of course, the clock tower during the Second World War, so it had honourable wounds from the second war as well, and it carried on. The clock itself carried on ticking, even with this blast on the exterior of the building. The clock didn't stop, so it was a symbol of the fortitude of the British. People listened by then to the clock chiming on the wireless around Europe, and of course they knew when they heard it that there was at least one free country still in Europe.
Elizabeth Tower, standing there resplendent, shining in its restored glory. The question now turns to the rest of Parliament. When will its own renewal and restoration project begin? I've been Tom Harwood for GB News. Well, thanks, Tom, for that excellent report, if I do say so myself. And thank you for watching and exploring Big Ben along with me. It was really fascinating to talk to some of the best experts in the business, the people that have been working up that clock tower for the past 5 years. A really special tour there. And of course, it will be open to the general public by the winter. So that'll be very exciting. People will be able to apply through their local MP to get that same tour. That's it for me this morning. Coming up, it's Alistair Stewart with our special coverage of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee live from the Palace. You won't want to miss it. All that to come shortly after the weather.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. The Jubilee weekend is upon us, and certainly for most of us, the start of it is looking pretty good. It's going to be a fine day out there. Plenty of sunshine. Bit chilly first thing, but warming up by this afternoon. There is one exception. This little weather front is just drifting its way towards Northern Ireland. So here we are going to see increasing amounts of cloud, and we will also see some outbreaks of rain working in from the west. There is also the possibility of cloud bubbling up and providing 1 or 2 scattered showers over Scotland and northern England through the day today, but they'll be very well scattered. Most places won't see the showers, just stay dry and fine with sunny spells. It is pretty fresh out there if you're just about to step out, but by this afternoon, it'll feel pretty warm. The winds are light, the sun is strong, and temperatures